All right, welcome back to another episode of EventHubs Talking Block. I am John Catalyst Green. With me as always is John Velociraptor Guerrero.
Oh man, we're not talking about Street Fighter, at least not directly today. We are, I'm also not going to say we are saying that the road has been fully paved for it, but there's little rumblings around. It looks like things are kind of set up in a way they haven't been before for, and I'll go ahead and say it, a potential new Marvel vs. Capcom entry, and that's all I'm going to say. John, take it away from here.
Yeah, we're talking about the possibilities here. We're seeing some signs, but first I want to talk a little bit about history for context here. Capcom versus SNK was looking like it was heating up for a bit, and then it fell off. Oda is a Studio One producer at SNK, who I've heard is very open to working with Street Fighter in the future. But I think these images here we're about to show up here from last Evo with Nakayama. They were a bit of a test run to see how much interest there was in a brand new Capcom versus SNK game. They had this new artwork commission. It's beautiful artwork, but the response was fairly tepid from the community. I was kind of waiting for it to kind of blow up and be like, hey, does this mean we're getting a Capcom versus SNK 3? Some of my sources here were pretty hot to trot in terms of getting information out there about, kind of a potential collaboration. And then this kind of came and went and kind of, that was it. And then so I looked a little bit closer, and for the Capcom versus SNK series, neither game in the franchise that was developed by Capcom sold more than 1 million copies, or it would be listed on Capcom's official investor relations website. And then the King of Fighters, while it's a popular genre, or a popular game I should say, in the niche of fighting game genre, it generally hasn't seen the level of sales that like a Marvel vs. Capcom game has had.
Sure.
And so it's it's a little bit of like, oh, okay, so I think it might have started out there. Capcom's looking for some collaboration work. SNK has been doing collaborations with everyone, but I think it kind of came down to like maybe they were kind of hoping to test the waters here a little bit, and when they did, the response was a little too lukewarm.
I feel like, okay, so I'm looking at this poster and I go, okay, there's no way that CVS doesn't come to mind, right? Like you see these characters interlocking on the same poster here, facing off in like the 1-player versus 2-player situation. They know that comes to mind. So part of me wants to just say, well, maybe this was because this was 2022 and they finally got back to Evo after having no Evo for a couple of years, and maybe it's just a celebration of fighting games. But I do see what you're saying, and that there's no way you can make this and not expect people to at least start thinking about it. So your idea here is that they're tossing around the concept of another crossover now that, say, Street Fighter is finally kind of back on the rails and doing well, and Capcom, as I think we're going to talk about, is doing better than it kind of ever has, or at least since like for like 30 years doing better than it ever.
Record-setting profits for Capcom.
So this is kind of like a little lead-in bread trail to we want to enter back into this crossover realm.
Testing the waters, basically, yeah. And so I looked a little further, and so as I mentioned, the Capcom versus SNK games have not sold very well, but the Marvel franchise, Marvel vs. Capcom franchise, has sold 10 million, that's million with an M, for the entire franchise, a run of 16 different versions of the game. And if you don't remember 16 versions of Marvel vs. Capcom, don't worry, they're counting the games from different platforms separately. In terms of mainstream games, there has been 4, but we're hoping for a 4, so we're not counting Infinite here in the calculus and whatnot in terms of that. And I think Capcom's going to do the same thing if they end up doing a 4. They're not going to count Infinite, bury that thing as soon as possible. But going back to Infinite here, back when this game was in development, we heard through the grapevine that Capcom was making an all-star fighting game featuring only Capcom characters, and they got the rights to work with Marvel at the last minute and unexpectedly, so they pivoted from that game to create Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. That is what we've heard through the grapevine. It's not completely proven, to us or anything like that, but we've heard it from multiple sources.
And that's what happened with Third Strike, by the way. That kind of a thing happens for sure. They'll have like a whole game planned out that wasn't supposed to be a Street Fighter game, and then they're like, let's take this game, turn it into a Street Fighter game, throw Ryu and Ken in there, and then, hey, something as crazy and as successful in certain ways as Third Strike comes about. So just saying that's not something that just never happens.
And this is why Capcom characters look a bit more fugly than the Marvel counterparts overall, because the game got an increased budget once the deal with Marvel came through. That's, again, what we heard. Look at Spencer here, is beautiful Spencer. And then, of course, my favorite character in all of Marvel Infinite, Kinley. That's just, the beautiful stuff. So the Marvel characters were made later down the line with a larger budget, and I guess the art style may have shifted as well. And so the Capcom models kind of got the short end of the stick here, and that's basically kind of like the history here that we have of the franchise from talking with people behind the scenes. And again, Capcom has great artists, like literally great, and we'll just say that the Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite game did not live up to the studio's lofty standards for graphics. I don't think Marvel was super happy with it. They delisted the game after a little bit of time, and we know from our sources again on this one that Capcom actually wanted to keep supporting Marvel Infinite, but Marvel basically said, pull the plug on this sucker. We don't want it anymore. It's the response is not, this is not kind of like how we want our characters or how we want our brand represented. I basically was the how it was inferred basically to the our community, and Capcom wanted to keep it going. They had more plans for the game, and they had to pull the plug on it.
Well, because Marvel knows so well what's best for their characters and their brand in recent times, right? I mean, yes, the superhero fatigue is a real thing that's pushing against all of it, and that's not just Marvel, but a lot of the decisions that Marvel has made in recent times have not been making them a ton of money. Not like they used to. The MCU was at its like height back in 2017. They had so much to take advantage of then with the Marvel momentum. You still can here even today, and I don't think this would be if there were a Marvel vs. Capcom 4. They wouldn't be today. It'd be maybe in a year or two. But I don't know, Marvel, you've kind of haven't taken your characters and your IPs in the greatest of directions, the most fruitful of directions recently. Maybe you should let someone else kind of take the reins for a second, at least maybe in this sort of avenue. Yeah,
and that feeds in perfectly here, getting into modern times. There was a report that Marvel hasn't exactly been knocking things out of the park, and that they're painfully aware that their game division is flopping. Marvel's Avengers did very poorly for them and was just delisted, and again, that's something us in the fighting game community, we know super well, that Marvel is going to delist their games that don't do well. Not only that, but their parent company, which is Disney, is looking to sell off parts of ESPN and another television network that they own, ABC. That gigantic television network that is seeing some rough times here. They brought back their new old CEO and Bob Iger, and he's definitely looking at basically how to modernize the company and make it fluid. And I can say that I think the Marvel video games division would love to have another hit on their hands right now with some of the lukewarm stuff that they've seen happen. And the Marvel vs. Capcom series, as we just mentioned, has had 10 million in lifetime sales here, and they're about 2 to 3 million copies sold per game, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but generally a fairly solid outing every time they partnered up with Capcom, and who you've mentioned is very much on fire right now.
Yeah, exactly. And there have been some success. I feel like Marvel Snap, I keep seeing that game popping up, but that's like it's a card game. It's a little different than something like a stand-up like fighting game entry might be, and kind of is in a different kind of category maybe. But yeah, I think that Marvel has had a lot going for it. They got some big ideas in their heads, and they went in certain directions. Disney as well, and Disney's seeing the same kind of backlash and the same kind of like flop after flop after flop with a lot of their films and their media right now. I think a good move to make is go back to something that worked. And hey, man, Marvel vs. Capcom, I mean, I know not Infinite, but it's been, as Dakota posted in the story, it's been just as long since Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite that it was between the release of MvC4 and Infinite. That's how old we are, everybody.
Yeah.
But more importantly than that, if you go back to a time and an aura about these characters where people were really excited, I think that that's a smart move to make when everyone's kind of scratching their chins and going, what's the new dumb thing that you're going to try with our characters that we don't want right now?
Speaking of going back to the past here on something that was very successful, we already know that Capcom and Marvel have some sort of relationship that they've rekindled after their Marvel vs. Capcom 2 arcade 1-up machine came out last year, and then they allowed Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 to be a main stage game at EVO this year. So that is stuff that requires some kind of licensing agreement, some kind of thing in place so that it can actually happen. And game development, as we know, it takes several years to come about. This early deal, we know it happened back in 2022, and signaled the two companies were open to working together again. Not only that, but Peter Comberfine-Rosas is a very talented developer who works at Marvel and is a senior producer over there. He's worked on the Spider-Man PlayStation games, which have been extremely well received by video gamers pretty much across the globe, and he previously worked at Capcom, so there's an established relationship between the two companies on top of multiple other people that still work there and still have a huge passion for Marvel games and for Capcom games and that crossover that they bring. Again, again, look no further than Marvel 3 at what kind of job that Capcom can do with this license if they're given the abilities to do so.
And with their hands very quickly thereafter tied behind their backs, and it's like, this is all we have, and yet still Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 still hit the heights that it hit. And in the US, that game rivaled Street Fighter with popularity. It's like Street Fighter was bigger on the world stage, but man, if it were just the US, you might have a lot more tournaments where it was MvC3 as the final game over even Street Fighter 4. That's how big this game was. That's how much attention it got.
Yeah, and one of the odd things actually about the Marvel vs. Capcom series is it doesn't tend to cannibalize the Street Fighter games in terms of like competitive players and even like sales overall. Both games actually seem to have a very unique and specific spot. There's a lot of people who just play Marvel games or just play Street Fighter games, and not many other FGC studios can say that they can keep multiple AAA releases at the top of the competitive charts without them cannibalizing each other. It's one of the very rare traits about the Marvel franchise. It's a special franchise for a lot of people. And then Capcom, as we mentioned before, is riding high at this moment with their fighting games. Street Fighter 6 has been a very large success so far, over 2 million copies. I'm sure it's even higher than that now. We haven't gotten an update, I think, since like late July, somewhere around there. I will just say that if Capcom goes this route, this game has to be 3v3. Again, do not ever do 2v2 with a Marvel game like Marvel 1 or Infinite. Team building, and don't put stones or gems in your game ever again. Like ever. Like make it a 3v3, because team building, having all these characters in here, don't make these characters functions, don't make the characters stand out.
Are we
make
getting
them
into
beautiful,
what
make
this
them...
game would need to be in order for it to be a success? Because I do want to get into that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, by all means, go ahead. But I just have to harp on that. Don't ever make a 2v2 Marvel game. Make this 3v3. We want these characters in the game. We want to destroy them in 2 seconds. That is a Marvel way. But we don't want them replaced with a stone or a gem.
Okay, so is it more, is it you don't want 2v2 because you want to have more characters and a larger character select screen so that you can get more iconic or relatable characters and faces in there? Or is it the game?
Yes, and then the team building is very important in Marvel.
Yes.
you can have, a two-person team is definitely something, but like that third character adds so much personality and so much other stuff, and that's Marvel. That's really the Marvel that people love. Marvel 3, Marvel 2, it's a 3v3 game. Those are the most beloved games in the series. You want to recapture that formula, that magic. It's so important.
Spider-Man teamed up with Morgan is cooler than Spider-Man teamed up with the Reality Stone or Egg or whatever it ends up being, right? Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I would say that as far as the characters go, there are some non-negotiables that you're going to want, but I think that we in the fighting game community had more of a reaction to no X-Men and no Doctor Doom than the bigger audience would, right? And that makes enough sense, right? But a lot of the people that would play this game weren't even around when Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came out, right? So I kind of put together a few notes here on what kind of approach that they need to do to make a potential Marvel vs. Capcom 4 successful. And yeah, I think first of all, if MVCI launched with 30 characters, 15 for the Marvel side, 15 for the Capcom side, I think that's pretty digestible by today's standards, with of course the inclusion of DLC down the road. So if you're doing it that way, I think the Marvel side is much more important to the larger population than the Capcom side in terms of the characters that you choose, just because Marvel is such a larger IP right now. I think Capcom has been making moves. They've got a lot of successful games as of late. But the Marvel characters have been the be-all, end-all for for going to the movies and for so much other media and content right now. So yes, get Wolverine, get Magneto. Who are the other non-negotiables that you absolutely have to have from the old games? Doctor Doom. Is Storm one of those? Can you get
Storm
by without
is definitely
Storm?
one of those.
All right, cool. Yeah. So and anybody else? I lot about 5. You have to have them for nostalgia's sake characters.
I would throw Sentinel in there because the Sentinel is such an iconic,
I agree with Sentinel.
Iconic Marvel character. Yes.
And then so after that though, Marvel has become such a thing, and again, you have your young audience where when MvC2 came out, Iron Man was definitely a character, but he was not the character that he is now. Now he is like the face and the leader. So I'm thinking you got to play towards modern appreciations, and that is have the core Avengers in there, right? You got Iron Man, Cap, Hulk. I think Deadpool should be in there as a non-negotiable right now because of the Ryan Reynolds series and how popular that's been as a perfectly interesting sort of side tangent for the character that breaks the fourth wall. It's so good. I love it. And so to skip out on Deadpool, especially if you could get Ryan Reynolds to voice him, that would be awesome. And we see that kind of a thing happening a lot with games like Mortal Kombat right now. So you could really do this big. And then on the Capcom side, I'm sorry, I should also say like Black Panther. Oh, and there was a tweet about this, right? Black Panther and Iron Man are both getting big games coming up, right?
Yeah, it's Iron Man was a handful of years ago, like when they redid the first Iron Man movie with Robert Downey Jr. and Marvel. It basically was such a big hit. It caught them so unexpectedly that Iron Man became basically one of the big faces of Marvel.
Oh yeah.
From that point on, and it was just like you can't do Marvel without Iron Man in there basically at some point. So, and same thing with Black Panther. Shout out to Chadwick
Boseman.
Rest in peace. Yeah. It's hard to. I wonder where they're going to go with that with after because he did such a great job as Black Panther. But yeah.
Yeah. So, you got Spidey, and then I think you could pick out, like, you probably do one of the Guardians representatives, right? Because that franchise has been one that's kind of maintained its face, and there's a handful of characters to choose from there. So maybe you do Star-Lord this time, or I don't know, if Drax, but or bring back Rocket, whatever. But there are a couple of obvious ones to go to. And then on the Capcom side, you got your shoo-ins like Ryu, maybe Chun-Li, Mega Man, maybe Dante, Morgan, of course. But then there are some that I think we should really see. I put Zero with a question mark because I know he was huge in MvC3, but I wonder if that was more contained to the competitive side and not so much the general public. But I do think a new Street Fighter 6 character in there would be very important for right now because Street Fighter 6 is seeing a lot of success, a lot of momentum. It's one of their new things. The Monster Hunter, a Monster Hunter rep would still be good because that's been their biggest franchise now, right, in recent times and now of all time. And then maybe Ace from Exo Primal, depending on how that game does and when this game comes out. But there's a lot of current representation that you could bring from Capcom that hasn't necessarily been there before. This brings me right nicely along to bring Leon Kennedy into a Marvel vs. Capcom game. I don't know why this hasn't happened yet, but now you have the character from the most successful and revered Resident Evil entry, has had the remake. The remake went well. Hey, the remake for 2 also went well. Why is this guy not in there? And why does Chris keep coming back? And nothing against Chris, but like, we've had enough of him, and he's not that great of a character that we would have to have him every single time. So anyways, I say all that to say, and if you wanted to contribute with anything in terms of the characters, feel free. But I don't think characters are the most important thing. But go ahead.
Well, characters are gigantic. Yeah. you have to have him in there. Dante's got the new anime coming out on Netflix, and so you would think that he would have to absolutely be a lock. Not only him though, you might throw Trish back in there, or Virgil, something like that. A few characters to represent the Devil May Cry brand, I should say.
Sure.
And yeah, there's such a great cast here, and really what I'm curious about is what's going to be marked as a launch roster versus DLC, because just because they're on the roster, it's fine, but like that launch roster better be very compelling, because that was one of the biggest issues with Marvel Infinite is people felt like they were going to lock everything behind a paywall, which they kind of did. Some of the better characters, Black Panther was a DLC character. That was a very bad choice. He should have been launch roster. There's a few others in that regard that like they just have to be on the launch roster so you sell the game. And Chun-Li doesn't look like how she looked.
Yes, and the characters, they are extremely important, not only to the fighting game community that have a special relationship with characters that have been in Marvel vs. Capcom and have functioned a certain way, but also that you have characters that the general public is going to relate to. And they had that, again, in MVCI, especially when, back at that time, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was just full steam ahead and could almost do no wrong or hadn't done any wrong yet. But I think the bigger reason why Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite didn't work on the big scale was that presentation. It was things like Chun-Li's face and Dante's face and Spencer's face. And with this kind of a thing,
they went like 6 months without announcing like a single character for the game, and then right before the game was about to come out, they unveiled like 12 characters or something, and we're like, what happened? Like, what did you just do? Like, imagine them doing that with like Street Fighter 6, where they go radio silent for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. They pull a Street Fighter 5 and just say, we don't know what we're doing, and then they announce all their stuff at once, and they have nothing left. And it's like, what did you just do? Did you just kill your marketing guy? And like,
you killed your whole marketing for your entire product, right? And the thing that happens when you do that is that it is not in vogue. It is not the thing that everybody is matter of fact doing, experiencing. I think about it like, again, when the MCU was at its height, when the new Thor movie, not the most recent one, or when the new Iron Man movie or whatever, the new Avengers entry came out, even if you weren't a huge fan, there was a decent chance that you were going to go maybe with your friends just to go see it because it was what everyone was doing. And if you were anyone who's anyone, then you saw the most recent Iron Man and you saw the whatever, right? And so I think that first of all, MVCI did not garner that aura around it. It didn't take itself seriously, and then we saw that with Chun-Li's face all the way up until like, oh, now we need to, that it was probably that issue that now we need to go behind the scenes and correct a bunch of stuff, so now we can't have it out there. Now we can't be marketing it. Now we can't be showing it as the new big thing that just everybody's going to be in. Because you remember the Street Fighter characters, well, also they're with these red-hot Marvel characters, and they're fighting, and you can look and imagine all the different combinations and what you could do and who you could take control of and the dream matches and the dream, synergies and all that stuff. It's like none of that was there for the general public. And so by the time it came out, we're on to the next thing, man. And it's whatever. Yeah. And still, it's like, I remember that. People were making the Chun-Li face their profile picture on Twitter out of a troll move, right? Like PewDiePie or someone like that did the Dante or the Chun-Li or something. And the relationship was, well, you guys didn't take it seriously, so we're not going to take it seriously either. And part of the magic of these level of popular characters is that it's just, you can't ignore it. Everyone's doing it. And if you're not on the bus and you're not doing this too, then you're kind of on the outside of the cool kids table sort of a thing. I mean, that's what you need in order for something like this to work. And so if you're going to do it, I think that they can do it. They don't have as much momentum as they had back in 2017, but they could still do it with these characters. And Capcom has a little more momentum than they did. So I think you could add it all up to being something that would be worth pursuing, that you could pitch to, Disney and Capcom, and both would see it as a potential success if they could capture this, you can't miss this kind of magic.
Yes, I agree. In tapping into something like the competitive fighting game community, where it's a Combo Fiend versus Marn, and he's doing the bionic arms and stuff like that. Like, Marvel is typically, not always, but typically the most hyped game in the entire FGC. Yes. How people go crazy over it and just love it. Tap into that with your marketing, with your advertisements and whatnot. Show how much energy this game has behind it. Show how the one-hit deaths in this game are something not only is totally fine and expected, and the community is totally good with it, where we're not okay with that in Street Fighter. We are definitely okay with that in Marvel, because that is Marvel, baby. That is what this franchise is about. Bring that energy back. Bring that hype back.
This, as the more we talk about it and the more I think about it, this IP seems to, at least on paper and through my old experiences, like you're talking about, being at an Evo and hearing that crowd, has everything that it needs. It has the hype. It has the esports watchability that even if you don't know the intricacies of what's going on, you can see the flashy lights, you can see the health bars go down, and you can recognize Iron Man doing it. It's like it has so much going for it, and an in with the nostalgic hardcore fighting game crowd, and a couple of arms that are going to reach out to the general public and bring them into. Go, it's right there in front of you as far as I can tell right now. Please take it. I probably won't even play it very seriously, but I want to see it happen, and I want to see it reverberate in the FGC, and I want to see it reverberate with the rest of the gaming community. I want to see it be that game that, a kid's walking through a store and he sees it and he goes, oh, well, I have to have that because it's got all these familiar faces that are so big right now. And it's like, oh, well, of course, Mom, I want that. Put that on the list, whatever it is. And I want Marvel vs. Capcom to have that time maybe again in the spotlight.
You get to fight with Captain America and Iron Man against each other, kind of thing. To replicate the movies, right? That's so much fun to do. And just to put a bow on this is probably still a little ways off. I don't see it coming out this year, kind of thing. Like it's still too close to Street Fighter 6. They need time to develop it fully. But I will remind everyone that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, that announcement came out of nowhere, and this one very well could too. I still think it's going to be maybe at the earliest next year type of thing. But there's so many reasons for these companies to work together again, and we're hearing wrestling of that happening.
You mean like the announcement happens next year and then it drops in 2025, or do you mean they like announce it early next year and by the end of the year, like a year from now, it's dropping out on the shelves?
So game marketing windows right now are 6 months to 12 months, and it just kind of depends on the product, how long they want to have the marketing cycle for. I think that Street Fighter 6 made more sense to have a long marketing cycle for it, since Street Fighter 5 was not well received in the community, and generally everyone wanted the game to go away and die, which it pretty much has. So it made sense for Street Fighter 6 to have a long marketing window. I don't know if it makes as much sense for Marvel vs. Capcom 4 to have as much of a long window. So you might be seeing something more like a 6 months, because that's what we saw for Mortal Kombat 1, I should say, for NRS. They had about a 6-month window. That's more typical and more common in this day and age.
Well, let us know what you guys think of all this, and do you think that the strong character selection is important, but strong presentation is paramount? As I was saying, who would you want to see? Sorry, I'm a writer. Would you like to see pop up on the roster as non-negotiables? Would you like to see them do anything crazy with mechanics or something other than Infinity Stones? It's all speculation, guys, but I do think that the road is more set up and more paved than it has been. And I think there's a real reason for these companies to pursue this. So my fingers is crossed.